This is the Sales Development Podcast, powered by Tenbound, hosted by David Dember. My name is James Bodden, here to introduce episode 213, featuring Jillian Mooney, manager of mid-market sales at Rocket Reach. David and Jillian kick off this fantastic episode discussing how Jillian has managed a recent hectic schedule, both personal and professional, as she's starting her new role at Rocket Reach and how she's ramped over the last 6 months. Great advice for anybody who's dealing with change, which is pretty much everybody listening. So great way to start the episode. The convo dives right into how Rocket Reach's core values empowered Jillian to be an empathetic leader and how that's shaped her leadership style as a whole. At the 15-minute mark, Jillian shares her thoughts on addressing specific objections during the sales process and gives advice on how to lean into those objections and the importance of being able to go off script when you're dealing with prospects and potential customers. At the 25-minute mark, Jillian and David discuss her thoughts on cold calling and its effectiveness in today's environment. All of you cold calling aficionados out there are going to love Jillian's take on this. And as the episode wraps up at minute 35, Jillian talks about how she coaches her team to become better active listeners. Look, this episode is jam-packed with practical, tactical, and valuable information for SDR leaders, sales leaders, individual contributors, SDRs. You all can gain something from listening to this episode. So if you enjoy, make sure you leave us a 5-star rating. Head over to tenbound.com to see what we're up to there. But for now, enjoy episode 213 featuring Jillian Mooney, manager of mid-market sales at Rocket Reach.
Welcome to another edition of the Sales Development Podcast. This is David Dember, your host, and today we're speaking to the promotion queen of SaaS, someone that is an empathetic leader that is always holding herself to the highest standards. Please welcome to the show, Jillian Mooney, manager of mid-market sales at Rocket Reach. Welcome to the show, Jillian.
Hey, David. I'm super excited to be here. Really excited to chat with you today.
No, me too. And I must say, for the last few months, your life has been, I don't know what else other word to use besides hectic, right?
So it really has. Yes. I've moved from New York City up to upstate New York, working totally remotely, started at Rocket Reach. It's definitely been hectic, but all good things.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I even went back as far as, I think it was one of your posts about a month ago, got engaged. Like you said, you purchased your first home. Yes. Relocated to upstate, as you just mentioned, and then started a new career at Rocket Reach. I mean, I don't know, or do you juggle by chance? Actually at the, I wouldn't say the circus, that actually sounds bad, but you've juggled so much.
Yes, definitely juggling a lot. Wedding planning now is on the agenda, so that's always fun, but it can definitely be a little bit stressful with everyone's opinions involved and all that. But yeah, no, I feel like all good things, finally really getting my footing at Rocket Reach and kind of figuring out, the best sales process here and what works and everything like that too.
I totally respect that. And I can relate 100%. Being someone that got engaged, got my first house, actually moved to Orlando, Florida. And then on top of that, started a new position, just like yourself here over at Tenbound. And it's a lot to take in. So it's we're going to have some fun talking about empathy today, talking about your leadership styles. And, even for that, for, in this case, your manager, right? Your manager probably has to have, it all comes downhill, right? Knowing that you have so many things on your plate, knowing that how much bandwidth and how much you've taken on over at Rocket Reach, let's really just dive into things and talk about empathy and leadership and really what that means to you and, what that means to the company as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with Rocket Reach as a whole. So Rocket Reach actually, first off, has a no asshole policy, which I think is really great to implement. And I know it's something that a lot of people that I work with are really proud of. We want just good people to work with us. So when I first started at Rocket Reach, that's exactly what I saw. Everyone is so understanding. Everyone is so empathetic. Everyone is always willing to help, which is really something special and something that you really don't get in every company that you work for. And in terms of my leadership, I really pride myself on having empathy. So I feel like first, empathy is a soft skill, and it's something that a lot of sales leaders, I believe, overlook. So a lot of times it's all about the numbers, all about hitting goal, which is so important, the most important thing. But I think a really great way to inspire your team and to help your team have that drive to achieve is by being that empathetic leader and truly understanding where your team is coming from and, what they're feeling, if they have any burnout, if they're having any issues with the company, everything like that. Give them that time off, lead by example, and take actual time off away from your phone. So I think there's definitely a lot to be said about having empathy, especially in sales leadership, where sometimes it is lacking a little bit.
Totally. And so let's just have some fun for a second. And I'm going to just paint a picture for you, and I'm going to see what your actual thoughts are. I mean, I think this is so important. But when you have a new rep that comes onto your team and you're talking about empathy and learning about them and their why, let's say hypothetically they came from a toxic culture. As a leader, without them coming forth and saying those things, how are you really building that upfront contract with them in a sense of being hey, maybe this was your leader's last way that they approach things, but this is how I like to do things, or communicate how we can communicate together. I mean, is there anything that you do specifically that really, allows your team to really build, or for them to really build buy-in, and you two kind of have that good building relationship?
Yeah. So I think something that I've always tried to do anytime I get a new rep is ask them what they are looking for in a manager. So what did they like that their last manager did? What did they dislike that their last manager did? And then it really does paint that picture of, okay, they really like, when someone coaches them. They really like when someone holds them accountable. Of course, you're going to get a mixed response sometimes where it's, oh, my old manager used to tell me I had to hit metrics and I didn't want to. Obviously, you have to balance between being empathetic and actually holding someone accountable. But I think it really does help to paint the picture of what they're looking for in a manager. And then you can lay out your expectations as well as a leader. This is what I'm expecting from you. However, I'm very understanding that things happen and that life can come up. So something that I always go by is if someone isn't hitting their metrics or whatever for that day or that week, instead of just saying, hey, you need to hit, X number of calls a day, X number of emails. It's, hey, so-and-so, why didn't you hit those metrics? Is something else going on that's prohibiting you from being successful at this? Is, anything going on at home? Is there time management struggles? How can I help you get there rather than coming at it from an accusatory kind of viewpoint?
No, and I think that's amazing. And, you've built this way of building organic relationships with folks throughout your career. And, obviously when I did that intro promoting, you being the promotion queen, I think probably getting some context behind that is, if anyone were to take a look at your LinkedIn, I mean, you see that you were over Indeed for, what was it, 4 years?
Yeah. Actually, almost 5 years.
Almost 5 years.
When I started. Yeah.
So, right. So I'm looking at 5 years, 5 promotions. I mean, obviously you were always up leveling. You were leveling up, right? So if we talk about that, aspect as being, someone that's been into the weeds, is doing the job that your SDRs and AEs are doing today, what advice would you ultimately give them? Saying hey, this is how I did it. And how can you really help them get to the same place that you currently are today?
Yeah, I think number one is being open to coaching. So when I first started out in sales, I was fresh out of college. So I knew nothing and I was extremely open to learning. And so what I would do at the beginning is I would just sit. It was in person at that point, and we didn't have Gong or anything like that. So I would just sit and pull up a splitter headset and sit with the best reps at Indeed. And I would sit with them for a couple hours. I would listen to everything they did. I would write down everything they did. And essentially, I kind of created my own talk track just based on the best reps. And obviously, that sounds pretty basic, but I do think that shadowing top and bottom AEs is super important. And you should shadow everyone because you can learn what not to do as well if you're kind of seeing, okay, this does not appear to be working with a lower performing AE or SDR. So I think first and foremost was just being a sponge, being super receptive to feedback. My first manager was great. He taught me so much about selling. So I think that's first, and doing your homework, learning as much as you can about the product, learning as much as you can just about the company and kind of how things work. And always, I guess, acting like you're in the next position. So when I was a senior AE becoming a team lead, I was already basically acting like a team lead at Indeed. So I would mentor people. I would help with all the new hires. I would let them shadow me. I would write up talk tracks for them. I would help them with objection handling. I would do all of these things just by myself because, I wanted to get promoted, and I cared obviously about everyone being successful, but I did want to get promoted. So I essentially acted like a team lead, and then, went to our head of sales and said, hey, this is everything that I've done, and I think I deserve the team lead position. And so, then there was an interview process that followed, but I think just acting like you're already in the next position. So if you're an SDR and you want to become an AE, shadow those calls, understand what it is that the AEs are doing, every single day, understand what bad practices some of these AEs have. I would say listen to some calls and maybe even formulate some feedback for them. You don't have to give it to them directly, but I think understanding where someone could improve as well is super valuable because you kind of have that insight going into it. So yeah, I would say that those are kind of a few things that I did moving through my career and, getting a bunch of promotions at Indeed, which was really great. And it's something that I hope to do in my future as I go on to hopefully managing managers and moving up.
No, that's great. And big kudos to you because I can tell not only you're a hardworking individual, but you're very humble. Every time we end up having that conversation, it's always positive. Like you're always just acting in a way that is like, hey, like I'm always looking to learn. You're not trying to seem like you're better than anyone else. Like you just keep your head down, you focus at the task at hand, and totally admire that about you. And so, really one of the next questions, I might ask is like coaching as a manager, right? Like kind of the framework that you really talk about. We talk about call coaching, giving the different types of feedback, really being able to set the framework for their success. Like, what does that look like as a manager on your day-to-day when you're coaching your team?
Yeah. So something that I try to do is set aside time to listen to calls on Gong, specifically for the people that really need assistance. So something that I will never do is micromanage, so I can understand what they're doing well, but I'm not someone that's going to be, micromanaging my best rep on the team. So I'd say mainly the people that I'm working on with calls on a regular basis is everyone, that's doing okay or that needs some improvement. So I'll try to set aside time to listen to calls. I'll write down all my feedback. And I think one of the biggest things when you're giving feedback to an AE or an SDR, whomever it might be, is coming off in that non-threatening way. So saying, hey, what do you think of the way that you said this? And asking their opinion, or how do you think this call went? How do you think this opener went? How could we have changed it to better resonate with the client? So really putting that on the rep, I have seen super good results from that because then they kind of can acknowledge it themselves. They're already more bought into the feedback rather than just coming in and saying, this is what I saw was wrong, this, and this. And it's really easy to fall into that as a manager. I'm definitely guilty of doing that sometimes, but in my ideal coaching sessions, it's really asking the questions of how could we have framed this differently? What else could we have asked here? What else could we have said to close this out? What other closing techniques could we have used? And just letting them really think about it.
No, for sure. And so I really like the point, and I did the same when I was a manager, but SDRs really listening to the AE calls, right? To really diagnose what prospects are saying on the phones or objections that they might end up having. So, with that, for example, I think it's like one of those things where if something where a prospect is saying they're leveraging X, Y, and Z technology, right? So a lot of the time, AEs and even SDRs, they walk right over that. And that really can end up crushing they could lose a deal if they don't address that right away, and would love to hear your thoughts about that specific piece right there.
Yeah, so that's something that I hear so much is, oh, we're using your competitor. And the person says, okay. and moves along from it. To me, when someone says they're using the competitor, that's the golden nugget to really unlock what they like about it, what they don't, what they would change, how their experience has been. And that's really your chance to get all of that information right up front. And I think sometimes this happens with SDRs a lot as well, is SDRs have, a script, which is great. That can really help people stay on task. And that can really help guide SDRs, initial phone calls. But I think it's super important to know that we should be actively listening and we should have the capability to go off script if needed. So if someone says something like that, digging into that a little bit more. Help me understand how you've been using XYZ competitor. It's really super important to have that active listening piece down, because I think that can be the difference between a good salesperson and a great salesperson. And just having that genuine curiosity. I was talking to a rep on my team the other day. They were, trying to figure out what types of discovery questions to ask. And I just said pretty basically, ask questions that you want to know. So ask how they're using, Salesforce today. Ask how they're using XYZ product. Ask questions that you think are important to know, and keep it basic and conversational. It doesn't need to be so scripted all the time.
For sure. And I think setting the tone for the call, even it starts as early as the upfront contract, right? Like, wasn't expecting your call. That kind of goes back to the Sandler methodology, but also can be mixed in with a little bit of the Challenger, is like, having the upfront contract can be anything, right? Like, hey, I know you weren't expecting my call. Do you have 5-10 seconds to tell you why I'm calling? And you can tell me if I'm remotely in the right area. I mean, there's so many different ways to position it. And then setting, and that's for the SDR side of like the cold call, but then also on the AE side of things, setting the framework of the call. Like, when you and the SDR just ended up, when you spoke, I should say the least, these were a few of the things that you talked about. Can you walk me through that? Like, what would the framework be as an account executive before going into the demo? Like, how are your AEs setting that up?
Yeah. So I think the demo preparation is arguably the most important part, because this can prepare you for your discovery. So, right. And I think the discovery is the most important part of any demo, because that's really where you're going to find out all of that good information that you can throw in at the end as you're closing. So I always say to AEs, obviously strategize and plan, do your research on the company, go into the call knowing exactly what your prospect does, understanding how the company makes money, how they would potentially use your product, everything like that. I think that's super important, and not enough AEs do that. And tell them that you did this. So sometimes I hear AEs that do a lot of research and then they go into the call and they act totally naive to what the customer does, because they don't really get how to start the conversation without asking, what do you do? Or what does your company do? Those are things where the prospect will be very impressed that you did your research. So tell them that you did your research at the start of the call. Clue them in on the research that you did. So Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, I did some research on ABC Corporation. It looks like you're expanding this year. That's super exciting. I see that you sell these widgets to manufacturing companies or whatever. Is this accurate? So I think that's super important to outline to them that you understand exactly what they do, and you're going to tailor your pitch to show value to their specific organization. After that, nice intro where you show off all the good research that you did. I think setting an agenda is huge. That's kind of a sales 101, but it is surprisingly something that a lot of reps miss out on. So understand, that your client's time is valuable. And this again goes kind of back to having empathy. Put yourself in their shoes. They've dedicated 30, 40 minutes sometimes to this call where they don't really know what's going to happen. And so, sometimes they no-show because they don't see value in it. Sometimes they show up and they're nervous that it's not going to be valuable to them. So by setting an agenda up front can kind of ease those nerves for the client. So set the agenda. It sets up the call for success. And if you were the prospect in their shoes, I know you would probably want to see an agenda as well.
100%. And I mean, when I was account executive, and maybe you've done the same throughout your career, but letting them know specifically that there was 30 minutes or 45 minutes penciled in on for the conversation today, and being able to ask like, hey, are we still good for that time? So another upfront contract. I mean, like, do you think that's a little too much, or what's kind of your methodology there?
No, I think that's great because it assures them that you are respectful of their time and that you won't be running over. And, I think that's super helpful because we've all been there where we want to cut a meeting off, the time is running out, but, the other person just kind of keeps talking and keeps going. So if you set that upfront contract right off the bat, I think that's an awesome tactic as well to reassure the client that you're not going to go over.
No, 100%. I agree with you there. I was assuming that you were going to go in that direction, but yeah, no, the worst thing that can happen, and I've been on the both sides of it, where early in my career, I even went over like 2 minutes, but I'm like, the more season I got, I'm like, holy smokes, like they're probably stacked back to back to back. So like looking at the clock, if we're getting down to that 1 or 2 minutes left, being able to once again, set the upfront contract being like, hey, I know we have 2 more minutes and you've been asking some really great questions, but want to be sensitive to the time today. Like, how have you done that throughout your career? And what would you say to your team right now if they're listening to this?
Yeah, I think you're talking about just the time management and setting that up front.
Yeah, I'd say the time management, but let's say we're coming down to 2 minutes left. 2 minutes left in the demo, for example. And you still have a lot to cover, but they're asking great questions, but they have that hard stop. How are you repositioning this? Or what would you want to say to your team specifically that is like, all right, like how would you get that to the next call?
Yeah. So if you don't have a hard stop, I would say, hey, I think you're asking a lot of great questions. I don't have a hard stop at 2:00. But if you do, then what we can do is we can set up a call for Friday and we can reconvene on all of this. Or if you don't have a hard stop, happy to go over. So if neither of you do have a hard stop, I think it's fine to go over as long as everyone's comfortable with it. And it's not just you talking and the prospect just listening and then they're not sure what to do. But if it is, their questions and they're engaged and interested, I would say definitely see if they're open to continuing. But something else along the lines of scheduling the next call, I think every single call you have with a prospect or a client, you need a next call on the books, whether it's, whether they say, we're not going to buy for 3 months. Okay, we will put a time 3 months down the line on the calendar. If things change, just reach out and let me know. Or if it's, 2 days from now. And if the client pushes back on that and says, I can't put time in the calendar, I feel like it's good to just say, okay, I totally get that. Why don't we pencil it in as a placeholder? If the time comes and you can't make it, just let me know and I'll move it. But I think it's good to have a placeholder on the calendar so we can touch base and I can make sure that I'm answering all the questions that you have. So that's kind of the back and forth I would say about next steps. That is super important, and always, always push to get that time on the calendar, because if you don't, it just leads to more ghosting from potential clients.
Yeah, and that's such a good golden nugget. And for those people that are listening, if you want to go rewind and repress play and grab that pen, that is so, I think a lot of the time I've seen folks that don't have that next step and then come to their manager and say, hey, like they've ghosted me. And then it's like, well, what was the next steps after the call? And like, well, we both were running late to our next meeting, so we didn't really have that next step. Well, okay, like just as you mentioned, it's appropriate to, regardless if you both have to jump to your next meeting, of being able to have that next call lined up. Otherwise, you're going to be seeing a lot of Caspers in your future, and that's scary.
Yes, definitely scary.
So, transitioning, I think this is a hot topic, super, super hot topic, and would love you to kind of be able to paint this picture of really what cold calling is. Some people say, you see it going all the way around on LinkedIn, cold calling, is it dead or, is it not? And one of the takes I got from you, and I think we talk about it offline, is you said cold calling is the new LinkedIn message. And I would love to hear how you really dissect this and really what that means to you and your philosophy here behind this.
Yes. So cold calling is not dead. And I am very confident in this. I hear everyone's other opinions and I get it. I understand where they're coming from. But cold calling is the new LinkedIn message. When I was first selling back in 2016, not too long ago, but everyone was sending LinkedIn messages and that was how you stood out. So everyone was, oh, I sent a LinkedIn message, I sent a connection request, and now this prospect is getting back to me. And that was great. And it still is great. And it still does help. So I'm not saying LinkedIn is bad. What I am saying is that was the way you stood out. And now everyone does it. So everyone is sending emails, everyone is sending LinkedIn messages, everyone is reaching out through, messaging of some sort. Now, no one's really cold calling. And I see this all the time. I mean, I see my team, I have to really, really put a lot of emphasis on cold calling, but it's really tough because no one is cold calling. So the problem is that you lose a sense of personalization if you're not actually picking up the phone and having this person hear your voice. And I know people will come against this and say, Jillian, no one answers when I call. That's fine. That's totally fine. People don't really answer random numbers at this point. But what they are doing is they're seeing that you called. They're looking at the transcript of your voicemail. So everyone knows on your phone, you can see the transcript of the voicemail, or if they're using Zoom phone, it does the same thing. So they're seeing that you, David, has called them and left them a message. So already you're standing out compared to the 10 other SDRs that have called this person today. So they'll know your name, maybe they'll know your company name. And then if you send out an email right after that, you can get their attention. So I think that's super important. And I'm also a big fan of, at the end of a voicemail, no need to call me back. I'll send you an email and you can just reply there. So it makes it as easy as possible for the prospect to get back in touch with you. But, they don't have to actually call you back, because we know people aren't really answering calls. People aren't really calling people back. But I really believe this is the way to stand out in the sales process.
100%. And I think that also ties in. That's a great multi-channel, right? Where you're calling, you follow with the voicemail. I mean, would love your take on the video and also text message. I mean, I have my theories as well, but would love to hear kind of where your head's at of what's appropriate in today's world. It's 2022. What's the way of doing it within multi-channeling?
Yeah. So I was curious. I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well, because I have mixed feelings about texting and video. So I think video is great. I think Vidyard is an awesome product. I'm sure there's some competitors out there that I'm not too aware of. I think it's really super cool and it is a good way to stand out, but it obviously takes some time. So if you're going to make a personalized video for every single person, that's got to be taking up a good portion of your day. I have mixed feelings about video, though I do think it would work, especially for strategic sellers. I think that's super important, where they're reaching out to less people, but they need to really personalize to get someone to respond. But for the mid-market and SMB reps that I manage, I don't know that it's necessary at the moment. And then texting, so funny. One of my reps has a ton of success with texting, but he's really the only one on the team that uses it. But he'll ask at the end of the demo, he'll say, is it easier if I just text you? And then he'll kind of get that permission from them before starting to text. But I do know other people that do a cold text, at other companies. And I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, but I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's kind of one of those things, it's a gray area. You have to be very seasoned on how you end up doing it, right? If it's someone that you've had a conversation with, this is at least from my experience, let's say it got to the point where you've had a conversation with them before, right? After a call. And you got that upfront contract, it sounds like one of your reps did. Is it okay to communicate that way, via text? At that point, being able to use or leverage, let's say you're trying to send them a coffee e-gift right before the call to kind of get the show rate, to send that personalization, getting a text message and coffee. Look, it's a lot better than going to your email, because imagine you're going to the coffee shop, all of a sudden you get a text and you click on a link, you say that you're coming from, you're calling from Rocket Reach. So they know it's not going to be, I guess it could be spam. And then all of a sudden there could be some virus if you click on the link, and then all of a sudden, your data, your identity stolen, whatever the case is. But I think it's okay to use it there. I think it's also okay to back check. If you're looking to make sure it's somebody's number, that you can ask them specifically, hey, this is David Dember. I'm calling from Rocket Reach. In this case, you're texting, you're not saying I'm calling, but your number was in our CRM. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't dropping the ball on our end. Our last conversation that we had was with X, Y, and Z, and they're no longer at this company. Wanted to see if you would end up having some time to have a brief conversation. Once again, I apologize if this isn't the best way to communicate with you, but did want to at least reach out and introduce myself. Something along those lines. Doing it like that, but also let them know on the gray area, if this is a way that you do not want me to communicate with you, I'm okay with that as well. And building the relationship in a way of like, hey, I don't want to drop the ball here. I know we had a conversation with your team and it sounded like the last person in your role was interested in us, right? Like that's like a really good way of being able to be like, oh, wow, like, am I dropping the ball on something? And where they get curious. So I think it's good to be able to use it in that way, but randomly being like, hey, hello, is this John? Like that might not be like, that might not back them into the corner. They could end up responding back. Yes, this is John. Who's this? Like it just might be awkward. So it's doing it in the right way. Obviously, I have a lot of other examples, but the show's not about me. I think you have been doing a phenomenal job. I hear a lot of great things internally about you and your processes and the framework that you've built, not only throughout your career, but what you're doing currently. So totally dig everything that you and your team are doing. So only the most respect.
Thanks. Yeah. And I totally agree with what you said about text as well. I think it's super important, to have that context in there. I like that, like kind of weaving in the multi-threading. If it's, okay, this person used to be in this position, or I spoke with this person at your company and, that's why I'm reaching out, and doing that through text could definitely be effective.
For sure. And then I think another piece, at least, is to be able to get the sales nav, right? Being able to see who's in your first connections, or for the folks that you might have that relationship with, randomly send them a voice message. Not a lot of people do that today. Send them a voice message, see how their day's going. Be like, hey, you know what? In my instance, I do have a lot of followers. I do have a lot of connections, but I actually take the time verbatim, like every single week, where I send about 30 or 40 voice messages a week, just checking in, seeing how people are doing. I mean, we're still, with COVID cases back up on the rise, with our economy, like people are not knowing, am I secure in my job? Am I not? Like there's just so much stuff that's going on in people's lives. And if we really pull back that human approach, like there's a lot of stress. So by you just sending a nice message, just no call to action, just saying hi, like, hey, we're connected, love to, learn a little bit more about your position. Like however you can like find a way of building rapport. If that's like seeing something that they posted and you can identify with that, if it was more of a personal post, just drop them a quick message. Let them know that like, hey, you really liked their angle when they talked about building a personal brand. Like that resonated with me and that really inspired me to do X, Y, and Z. No call to action, but your name is going to continue to keep popping up. It's David Dember from in this case for me, David Dember from Tenbound, David Dember from Tenbound. All of a sudden an email comes in. Oh, David Dember. Yes. Okay. Finally, your name's going to come up enough to the point where, you know what? I don't know if I need you, like, or your platform, but I'll listen to you because, you've been very kind. You've shown that empathy. Like, you've been really looking at my posts and you saw that I just lost my dog. And for you to even just send me a nice voice note, that really touched me, right? And that's how you build those organic relationships.
Exactly. No, that's such a good point. And I love the voice note idea as well. I think that's really super personal. And that kind of is, another way to allow them to hear your voice, another way to allow them for you to kind of almost leave a voicemail, so to speak, but in a message form. So no, I really like that. And I think it's so true. They might not forget, or they might not remember exactly, what you said or exactly the company that you're with, this and that, but they'll remember the name as it keeps coming up. And, that's super important, especially when you're socially selling or even just networking through LinkedIn.
No, for sure. For sure. And I think, that's an important piece. But like one of the things, kind of transitioning, last thing, I know you've got a crazy, crazy rest of your week. And I'm just so grateful that you've come onto the show today because you brought so much value. I think one of the last things maybe we can discuss today is really about active listening. We talked a little bit about the discovery call. We talked about kind of how to be able to add, some value, but like really listening to what prospects, like as a leader, how are you coaching for people that might not be the best active listeners? They've got other skills, of course, but how do you coach them on becoming a better active listener?
Yeah. So I think something that's super helpful in this is just having a software like Gong where they can actually listen back. Because I remember when I was first selling, my first manager would have us just record the calls. I believe it was through some recording platform that was not very tech savvy, but we would record it. And I remember when I was listening back, I would just I would have big gaps from what the client or prospect was saying to then what my next piece was. And it was just extremely eye-opening to actually hear, I completely missed where they said they were growing the team by, 10 people next year. Or I completely missed where they said that they really didn't care about this feature. And then I showed it to them later and, wasted that precious time in that demo setting. So I think number one is just having the capacity and the capability to actually listen back. And number two, this is pretty basic, but I think just writing down what the person says. So as you are in the demo, as you are in the discovery call, just jotting down a couple different features or things that the person is saying while you're talking has always been super helpful to me. So I always have my note up on my computer, even in one-on-ones. If someone says something in passing, I will go back to it. I think it's super important just to write that stuff down so you remember it. And at the end of the day, I feel like active listening, translates to every part of your life. So, your friendships, your relationships, everything like that. It's super important to, genuinely listen to what the person is saying and process it and kind of repeat it back to them and dig in more to exactly what it is. So I think it's something that'll benefit everyone in all aspects of their lives.
Wow. You hit it right on the head. I think, so many people today might miss those things that in our mind, it could be simple, but it's the repetition. It's really understanding an individual. And so as we wrap up today, beyond the fact that you're an amazing sales leader, what comes in my mind is, hey, are you all unpacked at your place? Are you and your fiance thinking about those next things when you turn off at work? Are you planning, what X, Y, and Z is going to look like for the wedding? You know what I mean? Yes, our titles, that's what we do for a living, but that's not who we are as people. So once again, sincerely from my heart, thank you for joining the show, Jillian. It's truly been an honor getting to know you. And I look forward to continuing to build our virtual, relationship, working relationship.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. And congrats again on the move to Orlando. That's super exciting. And super excited to have gotten to know you a little bit better and to continue chatting.
Absolutely. And quick note, we've got some awesome speakers coming up at the Sales Development Podcast. So please stay tuned and don't forget to sign up for the newsletter to get tactical tips and tricks that can help you and your team crush your quota. So until next time, this is David Dember and I'm signing out. Be well, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Development Podcast, the only audio forum 100% focused and dedicated to sales development. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube and take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes. Your support makes our show possible. If you are struggling with your sales development program, contact us at tenbound.com for a no-obligation exploratory call. Again, that's tenbound.com.